All right, back in the basement again today, and I want to update you guys on the Juggernaut AI app that I'm running in preparation for a USAPL meet on May 1st, which as of today, April 10th, is exactly 21 days out. So 3 weeks out from my meet, I'll be competing on a Sunday. Really looking forward to it. And this week starts the peak week. Now, if you've missed the previous videos or have other questions on other things on this training program, I have a ton of videos specifically on this particular prep. I'll link the playlist in a card on the screen right about now. It'll be up in the corner somewhere. The main difference for me heading into this peak is the drop in frequency on some of the main lifts, because as the intensity creeps up, the fatigue can build, the volume's gonna drop some. But the biggest thing I'm looking forward to is dropping some of the main movements, because like in my hypertrophy phase, for example, I was squatting like 4 times per week. I've been benching 4 times per week. I've been deadlifting 2 to 3 times per week. So all those numbers are gonna come down, and I'll show you maybe a screenshot of some of the movements right now and how the frequency is affected for this peaking session. So breaking down the week in general, otherwise the layout's exactly the same for the most part, still training 4 times per week, still doing a lot of the same movements. But what we're doing on the main movements is kicking the day off with a heavy single followed by back off sets. And then again, just work depending on the movements and getting things in to meet the frequency and volume that I need. So let's take a look at day 1, which was my squat day. The top set of squats was 540 for a single. I rated this at a 6.5. Felt really, really good, which I'm really excited about. Again, I've been testing the ins or knee sleeves. I'm not sure if I'm going to be using them in my competition or not. They're super compressive and super stout in terms of how stiff they are, but I'm not 100% sure that they give me a bunch of pop out of the hole compared to the Stoics that I sized down for my competition. So I probably will try to figure that out this week coming up, and then just make my decision to stick with 1 pair of sleeves, as I've kind of been flip-flopping the last couple of weeks, and I don't want to do that in preparation for the meet. And the back off sets all went well as well. So day 1 in the books felt really good, and that's good for me because the peak, generally speaking, this is the 3rd peak I've run on the program. Typically, I am wiped out by this point, and I'm surprisingly feeling pretty good so far, and I'm hoping that that continues. I'm gonna skip over day 2 because there's nothing in terms of a top single. It's just kind of getting in the rest of my work that I talked about earlier. Day 3 is my main deadlift day. My top set was 555 for a single. I rated it at a 7. I do think I was a little bit more fatigued. I was hoping this was gonna move faster based off how my squat was a 6.5 before. But again, compared to previous peaks, hitting a top single at 7 is good, because that's still what I consider either right in line or a little bit on the easier side. So I'm glad that that went well, and all the back offs did as well. Finally, finishing off day 4, that's my main bench day, 300 for another single, rated it as 6.5. So overall, my top 3 movements were 6.5, 7, and 6.5. Extremely happy about that. In terms of where these numbers relate to where they would be in an actual competition, I would probably put these somewhere between where my last warm-up and my opener is. But next week, I'll probably have a little bit better idea of where my numbers are gonna be, because to be honest, I'm not really too sure, and I'm really trying hard not to think about that. I tend to get in the bad habit of just thinking about 3rd attempts and final numbers, but I understand for powerlifting, the best approach, I think, is to just build your total. So hit the lifts you can and add to your total as much as possible. I've been guilty the last couple of meets of really trying to hit some key numbers for me, specifically in squat. And what that ends up doing is if I don't hit that number from my last or 2nd attempt, it really gives a big gap. So I'm leaving pounds or kilos in this case on the table. And I really want to try to just put together the best total overall that I can, because I think that would lead to my best meet ever in terms of Wilks or dots, or however you want to look at it or judge it in that regard. So taking a look at the program overall, next week is kind of similar to this week. Again, some top singles, they'll be heavier. They'll probably be more towards what a first attempt would be. My readiness is right in line. And in fact, it's actually been higher than it's been the last couple of weeks. And I'll show a screenshot here. I had that big dip as I was heading into my last strength training block and leading into the deload, which really kind of helped me recover. And I'm hoping I can maintain that, because that's usually a pretty good indicator of how my lifts are going as well. So that wraps up the week, and I'll give you updates next week as I always do. One of the things that I wanted to talk about in this video, however, was my nutrition, because I saw a couple of people ask questions about that. So I'm just gonna briefly talk about this, because I could probably do a whole dedicated video in depth. But I use MacroFactor currently, and MacroFactor is a paid app. And besides the RP app, I typically don't like to pay for dieting apps, because I've used MyFitnessPal for a long time, like many of you guys do. I'm a big proponent of FitGenie, which unfortunately is iOS only, but a free version is very well and really catered towards lifters, and I prefer FitGenie over MyFitnessPal. RP diet, I've done a couple of videos on, and I like the results I get on it. I find that I lose a lot of weight on that. So even if I'm going in a slight deficit, I find that it just sheds weight kind of easily when the food library wasn't as good as when I reviewed it. But MacroFactor, giving a shot because I've seen so many people talking about it, and I paid for this out of pocket. Actually, I think I used Bryce Lewis's code for a 2-week free trial, but I'm about 6 months in and I really like it. So in terms of my plan for this meat prep is a maintenance phase. So the last couple of months and for the last couple of years, my average body weight has been between 215 and 220. That's just where I've felt comfortable. I haven't decided to cut any further because, as you guys can see, I'm not exactly bulky right now. At the same time, I just haven't really wanted to put on a ton of weight just because I don't find that prudent at my age and for things that I enjoy doing, especially in the summertime, which is creeping up on us right now. So I've been in a maintenance phase, and that actually works out really well given the weight classes in the federations I compete in. Usually, how I would really pick my federation to compete in was based off of what I weighed, meaning that USAPL, I would typically do the 105 kg class, which is 231 pounds. Or if I weighed lighter than 220, I would do USPA because they have a 100 kg class, which is 220 pounds. And the next class up for them is, like 242, or the next class down from USAPL is like 198. So just depending on where I lie around those weights, I would pick either USAPL or USPA. But now, since the USAPL has separated from the IPF, they've switched back to their old numbers, which is the 100 kg class. It just didn't make sense to bulk up because I don't want to worry about having to necessarily cut weight for a meet, nor do I want to necessarily also be, like 221 pounds in the 242 pound class. So I decided to just do a maintenance phase, which works well because, as I mentioned already, we're leading into summer. So for me, calorie-wise, looking at roughly 3,700 calories of intake, 212 grams of protein, 124 grams of fat, 442 grams of carbs. To be honest, I really try to get as close to the caloric goal as possible. And I don't worry so much about the macros themselves because chances are I'm always going to hit those numbers, especially protein. In fact, I've actually been finding I've been hitting protein numbers a little bit too easily, and I tend to go over in protein, but it works out because I either undereat in fat or carbs, and I'm hitting my caloric goal. But it's interesting because back in the day, I could remember having to use protein powder to hit my goals, and these days I just really focus on some sources of meat that are high protein, and I really have no issues hitting those numbers. But that's basically what I try to do day in and day out. Now, the MacroFactor app gives you a whole bunch of other things. Like right now, I'm 79 days into my goal. I can pull this up and it shows me where I am. It can show me trends. It can show me my other previous diets that I've been doing. As I said earlier, I've been doing this app for 6 months. It shows you weight trends. So I weigh in every day just because it's easy to do. And I just like seeing the data as it changes. But based off of what you weigh in at, it can kind of project trends in your weight, which I find is pretty interesting. You can also just simply see scale weight and just see how things are going. This is showing me a week view right now, but if I switch it out to a month view, you can see I have some high days, some low days, but overall it averages out to about 215.5 pounds, which for me is fine. A typical day for me, let me pull up an example from the other day. I personally like to eat 4 times per day. I don't snack, and I'm not really big on snack foods, so that's not a problem. But if I eat 4 times per day, which for me typically is around 8 o'clock in the morning for breakfast, I then have my lunch around 2 p.m., and that's right after training. I have dinner around 5:30 to 6 because I have 2 young kids and they eat early and go to bed early. And then I have what I consider a second dinner around, like 8 to 9 p.m. or so, just depending on how things work out. So 4 meals per day. So given the fact I'm taking in roughly like 3,700 calories, that means each meal is around 900 calories or so. If I can, I try to front load some of that stuff in the morning just because I don't like eating a ton of food at night. But even then, it might be 100 or 200 calories swing in either direction. But for the most part, each meal is around 900 calories or so. And I try to balance it with protein, carbs, and fats. And you can see some examples here. To be honest, like my breakfast, my lunch, and my second dinner are always very similar. I tend to get very habitual in terms of what I eat. Like I go 6 months with eating the same breakfast every single day, and then I'll change it, and then I'll go like another 6 months. Dinner for me is kind of the wild card because that's the one where we usually do different stuff. Maybe we'll go out to eat, maybe we'll make something special. Now my wife, my kids, they don't eat meat. They're not full-on vegetarian because they eat eggs and cheese and fish and things like that. But for the most part, dinner can get a little tricky because sometimes my wife will have something different than I have, or sometimes she'll just make something for them and I'll cook meat on the side that I can add in, like a chili or something like that, or a pasta dish, whatever the case may be. But generally speaking, that's the basics of my nutrition. If you want me to kind of dive more into it and maybe some of the sources of food that I eat, things that are quick and easy, especially if you're working or a dad and you don't have a ton of time to make food or get all your nutrition in per se, I find it pretty simple again because I'm doing the same things all the time. I know what macros they are for the most part. I can eyeball it and I like how all the stuff tastes. So if you want to see a video on that, let me know in the comment section below. But otherwise, that's going to wrap up the week for this particular week, 3 weeks out. Looking forward to it. If you have other questions on the app or anything else you need me to answer, let me know in the comment section below. But in the meantime, as always, thanks for watching and stay big.